Okay, so U.S. support of Israel. This one's a big one. Um, I mean, I think it's one of the largest contributions to the ongoing occupation. There's a massive amount of U.S. support every year. Like monetary foreign aid, I think currently sits at just under $4 billion a year. And on top of monetary aid, the U.S. at the UN, at every resolution in the UN, the U.S. has veto power, and just anything criticizing Israel gets vetoed right away. Doesn't matter how many people are voting in support of those resolutions. So, I mean, in my opinion, it's one of the only reasons that the status quo is being able to be held in place in the region. I think if you take away U.S. aid, things will change significantly. So maybe you could speak from the point of a Palestinian point of view of a Palestinian, especially like yourself, who lives in the United States when you go to school. Um, yeah, what do you think about the support? How do you think the changing of that support could change the reality on the ground?
Yeah. I think it's when we have these conversations about the US, it's very important to talk about Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism is it's a belief within evangelical Christianity. I think that's like the evangelicals, basically, they have this biblical prophecy and they believe that when the Jews all return to Israel, then the Messiah will return, right? And within this scenario that they've created for themselves, the Jews either convert to Christianity or die. So and it's very at its core, it's very anti-Semitic, because this is the rhetoric that was used by British Zionists, British Christian Zionists, to drive out Jews from their own lands into Israel, because basically what they wanted was they wanted to drive out the Jews from their lands in order to get the only Jew that they want, which is Jesus Christ. And right now, evangelical Christians are the biggest the biggest voting bloc for Trump.
Yeah.
White evangelical voters. And so he caters to them. Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence, the Secretary of Mike Pompeo,
Secretary of State, I believe.
Yeah, State, and then the Vice President, both Christian Zionists, they're both evangelicals. And they just unwavering support of Israel. Like you see the policy or the proclamations that have in the past 3 years, the announcement of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the moving of the embassy, the annexation, the Golan Heights, the recognition. They even retracted their statement about settlements, and they said, Mike Pompeo was like, maybe they're not illegal, actually,
Yeah.
So this unwavering foreign policy of support to Israel at any cost has obviously allowed Israel to go on about its business with impunity. They don't suffer any consequences. And this is something that's funny to me when we talk about BDS, because a lot of Israelis that are against BDS, and I understand why they are, but I'd like to get this point across, is that Israel has never been sanctioned, by Western powers for their human rights abuses. And so when you talk about, why are you singling out Israel and stuff? Well, for me, number one, it's because it has a direct impact on my family and, my people. So I'm going to single out Israel. But also, Israel needs to be held accountable for its actions, right? And they're not, and they have never been within the international community. So the aid, me and Rudy, this is actually interesting. Rudy doesn't believe that there needs to be, that Israel needs to take in aid from America. He thinks that Israel should manufacture their own weapons and stuff. I mean, sure. I don't think it's that. I don't think he gets to the core of the problem. I think for him the problem is more about Israel being dependent, economically and militarily. For me, the problem is the impunity that Israel is given, in regards to human rights abuses. Because you go to Gaza, and effectively what you have is collective punishment, and then people will justify what's going on by saying, they elected a terrorist government. So it's collective punishment, right? Because you can't leave, you can't go in, there's no electricity, there's no water, you can't import, you can't export. And people justify it by saying, they elected a terrorist government. So this is collective punishment, right?
Yeah.
And for Israel, there is no collective punishment, right? You don't have the citizens of Tel Aviv that are locked in their houses because of the actions of the IDF or the Israeli government, or the multiple assassinations of Palestinian political leaders by the Mossad, which we never talk about. This is another point that I forgot to raise in regards to Palestinian leadership. Most of our leaders have been assassinated.
Yeah.
Like Yasser Arafat was killed by poison. My great uncle Hayal Abdelhamid, who was the security chief for the PLO, was assassinated in Tunisia in 1991, and he was very close to Yasser Arafat. And there's been countless occasions of Palestinian leaders, young, bright Palestinian leaders, that have just been assassinated. So yeah, I mean, how does it change the reality on the ground? I think that it allows for other actors to start getting involved, because right now it's just basically America and Israel on this side, and then you have Palestine,
yeah.
right? And we don't even have the support of the Arab nations anymore, to be honest, which I don't think is necessary. But yeah, I think that, and it gives me hope when I see Bernie Sanders and AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar start talking about. They introduced a bill that said the Israeli military aid should be conditional.
Yeah.
This is the first time ever that something like this has been proposed in the Senate. So yeah, it gives me a lot of hope. I think that our generation sees things for what they truly are, and that social media has given rise to an ability to understand things more than just what the media feeds you.
Yeah, that's an important point. I think I was going to bring up the piece of legislation that AOC has pushed forward, so that's great you touched on it. I think that's if nothing else, a really good starting point to get some conditions put on that aid, because right now it's just, here's $3.8 billion, mostly in military aid every year without fail. I mean, it's an insane amount of money. That's a lot, and that's coming out of United States citizens' pockets. That's taxpayer money fueling a foreign nation's military. So I think conditions on that money that would be a very good thing.